everybody, and welcome to Industry Night with me, Nycci Nellis, the show that takes you on a deep dive into the happenings of the hospitality industry. Every week, I get to talk to an incredible array of talented people about their passions and their professions. If you're new here, thanks so much for joining me. A little bit of background about me. I've been covering the food, beverage, and hospitality scene for like 20 years. I know I look very young for my age, but I do it through a variety of outlets: print, online, TV, radio, podcast, social, and now YouTube. 20 years, listareyounit.com, the online e-zine that tells you about every restaurant opening and food and wine promotion and happening around the city. Every Sunday, you tune in to Foodie and the Beast, DC's only food and wine radio variety show. We just celebrated 15 years on air. And of course, you follow me at NYCCINELLIS on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and Thread, and LinkedIn, and YouTube, and all the things. Subscribe, follow, like, comment, do it all. And yes, I am filming today in my very green, plant-filled office. But I'm very excited to report that thanks to Greg Caston and the good people at Fish and Fire Group, I have a new residency. My camera crew will be back, and I'll be filming and recording this show at the Point for the month of November. So I am both really grateful and very excited for that. So stay tuned. And if you pay attention to my Insta feed and you've been listening to the show, you know that I had some like ridiculous travel for the month of September. I had the incredible good fortune to travel through different areas of Italy. A little bit of work, a little bit of play. And you all heard, I was in Sardinia. I told you all about it. I was in Como. I told you all about that. But now I'm going to take you to the Milan portion of the trip. Now, listen, many Italians and Italophiles kind of disregard Milan because unlike Florence or Rome or Venice or Assissi, like it's a newer city. The city is just not filled with the architectural and artistic artifacts that you find in these older cities. It's modern, but I'm here to tell you it is so fabulous. I did not intend to love Milan as much as I did. So we wound up getting there, pure serendipity, a little less than a week before Milan Fashion Week. So the city was just buzzy with these tall, leggy creatures running all over the city to casting calls. It was insane people watching. Gucci, as in that Gucci, took over the city, especially the Brera District, which I will get into in a little bit. But Gucci was just everywhere, and Ancora Gucci, Gucci Ancora, everything. And it was just so much fun to be surrounded by it. We stayed at the Chateau Monfort, which is another Relais Chateau property. It's perfectly situated in the Montfort neighborhood. It's not far from the Duomo, which we got a fantastic price for along with the incredible opera house, La Scala. And we are close to two, not one, but two of the famous food emporium, Peck, which we went to every day. I had pizza at Giolina, which may be some of the best pizza I ever had, present company excluded. Knife and fork ready, which I want to talk about with my guest later. Langosteria, which must go on your list if you're going to Milan. It's off the beaten path. It's in the nightlife district, which is not where tourists normally go. This restaurant is massive, but you really have no idea because it's lots of little rooms. It is completely filled with people. We got like the last reservation at like 11 o'clock at night, and it was still happening and packed and amazing. Terrific seafood, terrific pasta. It was just delicious and fun. The vibe was amazing. I went to the Starbucks Reserva in Milan specifically so you don't have to, so you can all thank me later. Everybody tells you you have to go to the Starbucks in Milan, which sounds so ridiculous because the coffee is so amazing in Milan. But it is kind of like a Willy Wonka in the middle of the city. It's got this massive roasting contraption, and there are huge cylinders of coffee beans being carted all over the property, like above your head, under your feet. Anyway, It's ridiculous. And also, I will say the food offerings are crazy. Like, it does look like Willy Wonka, like pizza after pizza after flatbread after pizza and dessert after dessert after dessert. And it's massive and there's a line to get in. And I'm glad I went, but I'm not telling you, you have to go there. I want to get back to Brera District for just a second. It's like the Village in New York, but in Italy. And it's just windy streets filled with shops and restaurants and people. And it was so alive and so fabulous. There's just so much going on there. The architecture of the city is just amazing. There's lots of green in the city, especially coming off of the buildings. If you've been to my Instagram, you've seen what I'm talking about. And then our last night at dinner was at the Michelin starred, I hope I pronounce it correctly. David will hit me on the head. Michael Schlau will be able to help me. La Chimia, which is an incredible tasting menu, a ridiculous wine cellar. Pro tip, ask for a tour of the wine cellar. And the 36 yolk pasta topped with freshly shaved truffles. My throat is still like closes up when I think about it because it was so rich, but it was so good. And it was an incredible way to end our trip. So that was Milan. That's the end of my trip. But you know what you do when you get back from an amazing trip? You get COVID. No, I mean, we did get COVID, but what you really do is you plan your next trip. So I've got a couple in the works, details on that coming soon. Okay, so normally I would fill you in also where I've been locally, but I don't want to make my guests wait much longer. But pure serendipity, I did wind up at one of their restaurants last night. I was at the so good Japanese restaurant of Michael Schlau, Namako, which is just one of his 9 concepts across DC and New England. And like all good restaurateurs, Michael began his career in the culinary industry as a dishwasher at the age of 14. And he has held every position in a restaurant, but all before he went to culinary school. Now, I have had this James Beard Award-winning chef and author on this show and Foodie and the Beast many times, and there's a reason. He has an incredible insight on the state of the industry, and I just love going down a rabbit hole with Michael, and you can bet we're going to do that today. But we're not going to do it alone. In 2017, pastry chef extraordinaire Alex Levin joined Michael Schlau Group and not only took over the amazing pastry program, but is also the director of the strategic business initiatives. That's a lot. Okay, let's get into it. Hi, guys. How are you?
We're doing great. How are you? You're making me hungry.
Good.
I want some truffles right now.
I know, right?
You were there at the perfect time. You picked the perfect time.
I had some truffles last night at Namako, actually, with that like crack like truffle sauce that you should keep a little bit of it on the table, right? So that people
we
can
should
really
probably like stop operating restaurants and just bottle that stuff. I think
it's so good.
We probably do better.
Well, Michael, let's start with you. Like, I know you started in the industry at 14, but was it just like you needed some cash? Like, how'd you get into the industry and like what excited you about cooking?
Well, I had started to like cooking at a very early age. I think I was 10 years old when I would cook for my brothers and sisters. My mom had gone back to work, and it started out, I think, for the need of sustenance, and I was hungry, but it turned out very quickly to be creative, and I really enjoyed it. And I would my go-to back then was omelets filled with like the kitchen sink. Mm-hmm. And I would often get my brothers and sisters sick with my experimentation. I was known especially for my bologna and cream cheese omelets back then.
That sounds like an excellent pairing.
Yeah, it was not mortadella and like robiola. It was
bologna, like Oscar Mayer. I hear where you're going.
Yeah. And then my mom would come home.
You can only work with what you have. Come on.
And my mom would come home from work and ask where my brother and sister were, and they were often getting sick in the bathroom from my work. But I knew it was what I very early. I fell in love with it. I did get my first job really for money, but also it was wanted some spending cash when I was 14, and was a dishwasher. But was immediately bit by the bug. The interaction, not just between restaurant and guest, but also within the restaurant itself. The harmony, the collaboration, the fighting, the passion, all the things that go on behind the scenes I was just immediately drawn to it. And it was like a big family dinner every night, and you're throwing a big party every night. And sometimes everybody danced beautifully together, and other nights they fought like cats and dogs, but it was addictive, and I was immediately drawn to it.
But when you were working, were you back of the house, front of the house? I know you started as a dishwasher, but did you do all the stations?
Did it all. I mean, I was a dishwasher, bar back. Those were the first two jobs they sort of let me do. Then eventually, I was a busboy, and I would clear the tables. I stayed at this one restaurant all through high school, and so they eventually let me do just about every job there. I would be a host occasionally as I got older. I'll never forget, like, it was so exciting to me that at the end of the night, the bartenders would let me pour them a beer. Like, that was the coolest thing, I thought, was to be able to have the tap handle and, pour them a beer at the end of the night as we were all cleaning up. But no, I ended up being a waiter and a manager, a bartender. I cooked tableside in a tuxedo. Once I'd gone to culinary school, I used to, that was probably the most lucrative job I ever had. I made a lot of money being a tableside captain. That was very good. But, once I really just settled on being in the kitchen, then it was a path about trying to work for the best chefs that I could work for that would allow me in their kitchens and build a foundation, which was really something that my father had instilled in me, that in order to have a long lasting career in anything for that matter, doesn't matter what you choose, you have to have a foundation. And so I just would go work sometimes for free for the best chefs that would have me.
But so was there, well, you bring me to a point that I'm very curious about when it comes to your culinary education. Were you like, I want to cook Italian. No, I want to cook French. No, I want to cook Japanese. No, I want to have a better understanding of Mexican. When you say foundation,
Yeah.
was it the foundation of all cooking and then you specialized over the years? Like, what did
It's a
you
great
want to
question.
do?
It started out, it's a great question. It started out with that I thought I would be in the front of the house, that I hoped to own a restaurant. And the reason that I went to culinary school the first blush was I went to culinary school because I wanted to know all the things that would happen in a kitchen. God forbid my chef quit or walked out on me. That was the original reason for me going. It wasn't that I went to culinary school to become a chef. I just wanted to learn everything there was to learn about the restaurant industry. And when I was in culinary school, that's when I realized I don't necessarily want to be in the front of the house. I like interacting with the guests. I love that part. I love doing media, television. I love all of those things. But the reason that I go to work every day it turned out to be about being a chef and about the creativity, the practice, the habits, all those things. So when I said foundation, it was about good habits more than anything, building a foundation that was about cleanliness, organization, what kind of food you cook. I hate to say it this way, it almost doesn't matter if you don't have a good habits and if you don't have a good foundation to work off of. The other part is really about research, learning, passion, your own personal taste, and my tastes are varied. So I wanted to ultimately get involved in multiple things. But when I first started, the quote unquote best chefs back then, and I'm dating myself here a little bit, is the French chefs, and then there was maybe the Swiss and the Germans. And Italian food was not looked upon and American food certainly wasn't looked upon as something that could maybe command, whether it's a high price or the notion of a celebratory dinner or anything like that. And in our lifetime, obviously, things have changed dramatically, where all foods and all cuisines have a place and can be, lowbrow or highbrow. And so that was very interesting to me.
Well, not to jump ahead too much, but I mean, the change, I think, of the financial structure of foods from anywhere around the world really in the last 15 years changed drastically. Like, I'll never forget when Scott Trudeau and Wolfgang Puck opened up the Source here in DC. And it was really like the first expensive Chinese food restaurant because unlike New York had plenty of, in LA,
lots of them. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But for nationally as a trend, we've sort of been trained that you don't pay a lot of money for certain cuisines.
For tacos, for Mexican food, we would always think that was
right.
Just street food. And it was our own, I think, I don't want to say it was the ignorance of our country, but it was the youth of our country. And it was our youth when it comes to knowing good food from bad food. And I think about my own upbringing. I was born in Brooklyn. I went to high school in New Jersey and went back to New York to work. And I think about, what was, when I didn't have any money, a slice of pizza was a great way to fill my stomach, you know. But I think about one of the restaurants that really changed my life was a restaurant called Sapore di Mare, which was out in East Hampton, Long Island, and it was one of the best restaurants I've ever worked in my life. And it was Italian, and it was a high-end place that embodied the casualness of Italians, but also completely embodied and personified their incredible commitment to perfection and tradition, where it wasn't what I grew up with, which was, you know, I grew up with red sauce. I grew up with all the Sopranos dishes, you know, those kinds of things.
You
And
grew
here,
up with no A and no O, right? In
and I
Italy,
got
they
yelled
say
at.
mozzarella. In
I
New
got yelled
York,
at from
New
my,
Jersey,
yeah,
they say mozzarella.
yeah. And it's got to be guttural. You know, it's got to sound like you're having a stomach ache too. It's like mozzarella. You know, it's like it's
Mozzarella.
not. Yeah,
Prosciutto.
prosciutto. And so I got in trouble. It's a story I tell often. My boss, his name was Pino Luongo. He's still in the restaurant business in New York City. He was from Florence, and he was a magician. He was amazing, taught me so much. But I would go to him, and I thought that I was trying to be cool to speak this guy from Italy. What are you doing with the galama? What are you doing with the prosciutto? What are you doing this? And he looked at me finally one day. He puts down his name. He's like, "Why do you speak like this? What's wrong with you? What's the matter with you?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "There's no G in calamari. It's C. It's not galama." I was like,
Right.
"Well, that's the way I was taught." He goes, "Well, you were taught wrong."
Right.
And that, what I did in research though over the years, and I know you were just talking about your trips to Italy, is to learn about dialect though also, because just like in our country, the further south you go in Italy, just like the further south you go in America, words change, phrases change. And so if you were to learn the perfect, you know, sort of Queen's English in Rome at your, you know, at your English class and never spoke a word of it, and you get dropped off on your first trip to America and you're dropped off in, say, Mobile, Alabama, and somebody goes, "Hey, how you all doing?" That doesn't sound like, "Hi, how are you?" You know,
Sure.
it changes. And so mozzarella and all those things, a lot of it was dialect, and it got changed. It got changed as people came over, you know, on the boat also, you know, as
Hmm.
migration happened and immigration, that was a lot of change. But the food, the beauty of the food, the integrity of the food, you know, I love it all. But, you know, if you came to my house 9 times out of 10, you'd probably have Italian food.
Right. Well, because there's a
Everybody loves it.
simplicity. I mean, listen, everybody loves it, but I hate to say simplicity because that makes it sound
It's not
easy, but
plain though. That's the difference. And that's what I say is
yes.
simple is not synonymous with plain. A simple bowl, like you were just in Milan, a plate of risotto Milanese, which is just a saffron risotto
Right.
done by an expert, is something that is ethereal. A, you know, lambattina di vitello, a pounded out veal chop, Milanese
Mhm.
style, with just a little salad on the side and a squeeze of lemon. When
So
everything's in harmony and perfect, the food doesn't get any better than that. I feel the same way about Japanese food, where it's super simple, but it's not plain, and it's all about the integrity of the ingredients, and then
well,
also the expertise of the person making it.
that's what I was just going to say. I think what we find more and more, and it's like Americans had to do like this full circle thing to understand it, that the integrity of the product at the end of the day is the most important thing, right?
It's
Like
everything.
if
It's
you
everything.
have an amazing product,
Right.
it doesn't need a lot of manipulation to be
No, it
delicious.
also, I think that I certainly and Alex, we both have grown up in a time
I'm going to
when
get to Alex. Don't worry. I'll
I
get to
know
him.
I'm not. It wasn't a lead in. I don't need him. I mean, I'll speak the whole time. He'll just nod. But what's interesting, I think, is that we all lived through a time when we would see these menus with laundry list of ingredients. Flavor on top of flavor on top of flavor on top of flavor, and you would say, "Well, that sounds really creative and interesting." I think, but does it taste good when it's put together? And I think one of the reasons, I use this example all the time with those long laundry lists of ingredients. When you do a wine tasting, you don't pour a glass of Chardonnay on top of a glass of Sauvignon Blanc, on top of some, Cabernet Sauvignon, on top of some Merlot, on top of some Albarino, shake it all up and then drink it and say like, "Oh yeah, I taste all of those things in there." You can't, your palate just can't decipher that much.
Right.
And so when I think about things as simple as there's this pasta on our menu at every Altistrada called spaghetti aglio olio con pomodoro. It's just olive oil, garlic, tomato, and a little bit of crushed red pepper.
Mm-hmm.
It is the simplest dish.
But it's so yummy.
And it's just how much salt, how much pepper. Did you cook the pasta for exactly 4 minutes and 40 seconds? Because that's what fettuccine takes. Did you cook the pasta and the sauce together?
Mm-hmm.
And there's no cheese in the dish. There's no basil in the dish. There's not, I mean, it's so simple.
Mm.
But if made properly and seasoned properly, it sings. And think about, you ate at Namako last night. I hope that the rice for the sushi was the right temperature.
Well, you and I have talked about that. So I feel like so people don't know. Let's talk about what your restaurants are. You
Sure.
started in Boston with a restaurant. So let's just go through them very quickly and the styles of food that you're serving in them. And then I'll hit up Alex.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, the company has done a lot of different styles of cooking. It's always personal and it's always of community as well. Is this restaurant wanted in the neighborhood or in the city that we're trying to open it up in? And so I started, my career in New York, and then I moved to Boston in the late 90s, and I had a series of restaurants there, including Radius, which was a very, well
known, well received. Mm-hmm.
And it was an amazing place that lasted for 15 years until, we couldn't renew our lease any longer. But we did Via Matta, which was a very traditional Italian restaurant. And then we started, the first Tico was there. And just lots of fun restaurants. Great Bay was a seafood restaurant. So we built a series of restaurants there. And the first Altistrada, which is your neighborhood Italian restaurant, was in Wellesley, which is just outside of Boston.
Mm-hmm.
We built one at Foxwoods Casino in Connecticut. And we were looking to do Altistrada maybe first here in DC, but then an opportunity presented itself on 14th and U to do Tico. That was what the landlord and developer wanted. And so we did Tico, and we did great there. It opened about 10 years ago.
Right.
Unfortunately, when COVID happened, Tico just wasn't doing it. We did Alex had come up with some great ideas on how to drive some revenue during COVID, but it just wasn't clicking. And it certainly wasn't clicking as we started to emerge from COVID. So one of the things that I thought was, what could we do with that space? We had built an Altistrada on 5th and K, which is doing well. We had built an Altistrada out in Mosaic.
Well, you guys, I got to say about Altistrada on 5th and K, for people who don't know, that area, like when you opened, like you had
Mandu.
I parked there, but it wasn't a parking lot. I mean, it was just dirt. And, that whole area with Capitol Crossing, like that whole, like you held
it's really
it
changed
until it's where it is now. It's totally different. It's amazing.
Yeah. And there were times where we struggled, where we weren't sure if we were going to stay or not. Danny Lee and Mandu is a good friend and our neighbor there. You've got a lot of good restaurants now in the neighborhood, so it's good. And we built
a lot of residences. I mean, now you have
people
all
living
those
there.
new office buildings. I don't know if office buildings help,
Correct.
but new buildings, and that sort of changes the dynamic. You know what? I'm going to pop into Alex a little bit because I want to talk about how he joined you, because he's really changed from being, don't take this the wrong way, Alex, like just a pastry chef, to making every ending sweet, to really be taking over a part of the business of what you both are doing. And then I'd really like to get into site selection and how you go about doing that, especially as we talk about like both your Altistradas and how you change Tico. So hi, Alex.
Hi. Thank you for having me on the show too.
Of course.
I moved to DC as part of the opening team of Osteria Marini, which Michael White brought to the area. And it was just a few years later that Michael and I got together and started talking. We had early morning meetings together that were really more like sitting, amongst, for me at least, I felt like I was sitting with a new friend having breakfast. And we would talk about our visions for what we believe restaurants should look like, what people that work in them, what they should feel, how they should act and react towards one another. And I really felt a strong camaraderie from the very beginning with Michael and the company that we work in together and that we're building together. And most of those special moments were at the Rigsby at 7:45 in the morning, right before I'd have to run over to my shift and just get ready to set up for the day. But nothing was really more thrilling for me than when I was able to see the letter in the mail or the email from Michael inviting me to join Schlau Restaurant Group and work, every day together. So, it's interesting when you work at Schlau Restaurant Group. It's just a very different kind of place to work. It is not a place where anybody feels like they're anywhere but home. That's been my experience. I feel like the people that I work with, I can pick up and speak to them about just about anything that's going on in my life. I feel very strongly for the people that work, at a level that might be below me, on my level, and of course for the people that I look up to. And that's always been the case from the beginning of my career up until where we are today.
But
Alex,
how did you go?
Hold on, Nycci. Alex, who do I make that check out to for all those kind words?
I
Do
know,
I just make that to
really.
Alex Levin? Is it the Levin
Is
Foundation?
there like Venmo happening here? What's going on? Alex, but you were brought in initially, right, to like sort of take over the pastry program. I mean, when you were at Osteria Marini, I mean, you vaulted very quickly as a must eat, must try, must know. I mean, you vaulted very quickly to be well known in the city among, the chef literati that were here.
Indeed. And so like what ended up, the conversations began because there are always a lot of different projects that Michael and our group, become involved with. And, it turns out that the project that we thought I was going to be involved with kind of morphed into something else. And that something else made me the pastry chef of all of the restaurants that were in the group. And I remember coming in and, there hadn't been a pastry chef working in the group for almost, what was it, Michael? 18 months, 2 years at that point?
A little less than that, but yeah, it had been some time. It had been a little over a year. And what Alex is not also giving himself credit for, that I will tell you, he's probably too shy to say it about himself, is I immediately not only loved him and his personality and his approach to work, but I loved what he made. He is super talented, and he is also one of the rare chefs, pastry chefs that I've ever met, that while we all want our products to be perfect the first time we ever make it, he's always tinkering, twisting things, making it better, and is open to people saying, I think that this is great. Can you even push it to more? Alex now makes, I think, he always did, but I think he's even elevated what I already found to be an amazing product. And so and I don't want to ruin the story here, but aside from this incredible talent about pastry, is that Alex also showed incredible, proclivity to being really smart about business and numbers and spreadsheets. He's got a mathematics degree from Yale, and I was
going to say he did go to Yale. He's
really smart, and so
the hardest part about Yale was getting in. Let's be real.
Yeah. So we wanted to make sure that
that
we
is
were
not true.
we wanted to make sure that we were able to fully utilize all of Alex's talents, and his ability to do a pop-up bakery out of nowhere and like $10,000 later. You're like, how did you do that, Alex? And when the people get the product, they're like, holy crap, this is delicious. And so one of the things I'm here in DC this week, Alex and I are going to talk about and work on is how to continue to do more of that. This notion of appreciative inquiry, like what do we do well as a company, and how do we do more of that? One of the things that Alex started to mention that I want to reiterate is that our collective attitude is nobody works for us. We work together. Who works with us? And it's a different approach. It's just a different approach.
So let's start on there with it, because hospitality is very important to your restaurant group. You have a certain level that you both expect from those who join you. Pandemic, we are post-pandemic now, right? We had it's been tough. And the industry went through this real pendulum swing, right? Like during the beginning of the pandemic, support the like everybody was like, yes, support your restaurants, give extra tip, do all the things, to like this other pendulum swing where we are now, where restaurants are still there is still, like, you're still catching up. There's still struggles, right?
100%.
Staffing is still a huge.
It might never be the same, right?
Right. But
Right.
since we know, here's what I feel like we learned. I mean, I don't own a restaurant, obviously, but from who I talked to, what I've learned, what we all saw 3 years ago was that the foundation wasn't there, that the structure needed to be fixed in order to sustain, maintain, survive, and then thrive, right? So we all sort of talked about that in the beginning, right? I think I had you guys on a show. Like, I talked to everybody about, we need to do changes, we need to change, but everybody was so like trying to cover their ass and pay their bills and get shit done that now we're here and we're in this place where a lot of people are very busy, but nothing has changed. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, we're still struggling, and we're struggling for staff, and there's a struggle out there, and the expectation that the consumer understands that struggle is gone. The consumer doesn't care.
Well, that's true. There was definitely a free pass for a little while. Mm-hmm. That free pass is definitely gone. But I'm going to respectfully disagree that nothing's changed. I think, jump in, we've changed as a company. We're smarter, we're more nimble, we communicate better. We've constantly, I think I'd like to give our company some credit in that I think we always did this, but we've done it more so since COVID. Some of it I'm not happy about. Like, I wish we were open more hours, but you just can't be, because you have to, again, be nimble and smart about how the labor model works. And that's a big thing that Alex jumps in on in our company. He gets very involved in that as to where can we become of, equal, if not more value to our neighborhood, to our community, because we do provide a service and an experience. But at the same time, how do we make sure that with the limited amount of hours we're operating, that we're making money?
Sure.
That we can just
afford. So Alex,
it.
how do you do that? Like, in today's, given the struggle still for staff, how do you do that?
I mean, sometimes, Nycci, it's literally going through for 3 days straight and calling, 200 people on the phone and screening them so that the rest of my team can have a meaningful interview with 1 or 2 people, and hope that from doing that, 2, 3, 4 days a week, that we can find the right person and bring them on and get them to join our team. And that is like one of the things that I never really had to do before. We used to put up a very simple ad saying, hey, we're hiring chefs, we're hiring servers, and we'd get 25 people applying for, for the position.
And they would show up for the interview.
They would show up. Now we have to approach them. We have to text them. We have to email them. We have to leave voice messages. And
but Alex, that's the negative part of it, right? Which is, we're dealing as a community, as an industry, we're dealing with this. Right. We're not the only industry to deal with this. Every industry there is a.
But Michael, what I was also going to say though is that when you do find that right person, it makes it all worth it. We just recently hired a chef at Alta Mosaic that took a while to find, and already
we just had him on Foodie and the Beast.
And you had him on your show, Foodie and the Beast. Right. So Matt, right away, has impressed us. He's working very hard. He's working very well with the team. He understands our philosophies, and he's really joined forces with us in a way that we're really excited about for the future.
So part of that, but what I was going to say about that is that, finding the person is one thing. How do you retain them is the other thing. And so we have seen for years and years and years now, people saying, well, I'm going to go down the street for $1 extra. So where I think change has occurred for us, and it may have been slow and then sped up during COVID, I say ad nauseum, we have to provide a learning environment in our restaurants. Whether you're the chef, the GM, or a busboy, if you are in a learning environment, you're more, and in a pleasant learning environment, obviously, you are more apt to stay if you feel like you're getting something beyond tips or a wage. And, listen, it's a whole nother conversation that we don't want to talk about today. We can spend another day on it. But DC makes it harder and harder to do business here. The changes to the wages here. It changes things. And
Well,
it makes it
actually,
fun to do
can
business.
we? So listen, I kind of get into it with almost every
Sure.
restaurateur who comes
Sure.
on. They vote. The people voted for it, right?
Because they
Like
were duped.
50,
The
right?
people were
The
duped by the way the
message.
ballot was written.
I mean, it was done twice. They voted for it twice, and
Yep.
there was always that like small peanut gallery in the industry that was like over here, like no, we want it. Whereas most in the industry were like, no, we don't. But it still got through. So how does it affect both of you in the business? Like, what
Sure.
is it that is
So,
affecting you?
so number one, if you were to ask anybody in the world, do you think that servers should make a fair living wage? The answer is absolutely 100% yes. What they leave out is that when you have a tip credit situation like we have in Boston, which makes it much more, easy to do business, is that let's just say there's a snowstorm and nobody comes in today. If the minimum tip credit wage was, I'm making up the number, $5.25 that year, and it snows and nobody comes into the restaurant, they don't make $5.25. You are mandated to make up the difference to make sure that they at least get minimum wage.
Right.
Now what is going to happen is not only will they get minimum wage, that minimum wage continues to go up to 15, 16, who knows where the top will end,
Right.
but they get that and their tips on top of it. So waiters in our restaurants make wonderful livings. They make a lot of money and they get their tips. And what's going to end up happening is one of two things will happen in DC proper. You will end up with large chain restaurants only who have different abilities and different buying power, and that's how they'll make up the difference on the labor. But right now, labor and rent are our two highest costs. Not food anymore, even though food's very, very expensive. But labor and rent are what are the killers of our business right
Well,
now.
can we talk about rent? Because I
Sure.
had John Osadorian on the show a while back, and I love John, and he's a
He's great.
gossip. We dig in deep on all the things that are happening in the city. It's always fun. But I sort of went to him in the interview and said, "Who makes up these numbers? Like the per square foot is so astronomical. It doesn't. Now it's becoming a detriment to the
100%.
state. Do you only want chains?" I literally said that to him. I was like, how is the independent retailer and restaurateur
Can't do it.
supposed to open up in these spaces? I had two issues. I was like, first of all, you keep making these massive spaces in these new buildings. Like, where's the little, 40-seat restaurant? Where's the little, like, salt and sundry kind of space? Where are these spaces that independent retailers and restaurateurs can get into, pay their people, and make a living?
Can't do it. And so, yes. So, I mean, in John's job, and I love John, don't get me wrong, I've known him for a long, long time, and he's one of my favorite people.
He's great.
But I will often say, and often to deaf ears, you as the developer and you as the real estate broker, what is your goal here? I remember when we were very close and still are with Robin Mosley when she was at JBG, and Robin would say, my job is to help create communities, to help create neighborhoods. And if all I do is put on Starbucks and a Bank of America and a Cheesecake Factory in there, then every neighborhood's going to look exactly the same and they're not going to have any difference. So she would say, I try to, balance it out so that the landlord gets some good, what they'll call AAA credit, chains, and then have room for the places that, like you spoke about, are 40-seat, salt and sundry kinds of places, or small retailer, small restaurateur. The reality is that if they continue to charge what they are charging, you will see more and more vacancies or more and more chains. The small operator cannot afford the rents, and there's these benchmarks that we feel are important to hit when it comes to things like occupancy costs. And when you start to go over occupancy costs of blank, that means that you're not making as much money on the bottom line. You can't pay back your investor or your bank or your staff. And so there is a number that we are disciplined about, and it's why you don't see us in more restaurants. It's not that the phone doesn't ring and people say, hey, we want you in such and such a space.
No, I know that. Right.
But I'm not paying $100 a foot to be in a place. If you do, you have to do $1,500 a square foot in gross revenue. And that is an extraordinary amount of money per square foot. So what the landlords I'm going to take New York City out of the equation for a second because their density of population, it's an unfair.
Totally different. Right.
Right. But anywhere else in the world, if you are doing, $750 to $1,000 a square foot gross revenue, you really can't afford much more than $45 a foot in rent. And landlords don't want to hear that. And then a landlord now wants on top of it, and this wasn't the way it was when I first started in the business, a landlord now wants you to pay their common area maintenance charges. So if they have to remove snow, they want you to pay for it. They want you to pay for their real estate taxes. That wasn't the case when I got into the business. Occupancy costs when I got into the business, we tried never to go over 5%. Now we try not to go over 8%. But you start to creep into 9, 10, 12%. Unless you've got a restaurant that's doing tens of millions of dollars, the margins are just very, very slim. That being said, we still are interested in doing more and more business. And you were saying at the beginning of the show about site selection. It's hard here in DC because the good sites, quote unquote, keep changing every time a new neighborhood opens up. So 14th and U was considered an amazing location 10 years ago. And then Shaw opens up, and then Navy Yard opens up bigger. Then the Wharf opens up, and we're sort of a little nomadic in where we go. And so,
yeah, but don't you think? Here's what I think is interesting, and I'm very curious to how you both look at this. So, 14th Street, yes. When you opened on 14th Street, you were one of the originals on 14th Street. You were in a new building. I mean, you and 14th Street was on fire, but there was incredible investment from the city, as well as, real estate, buildings, etc., to create that excitement around 14th Street. Now, listen, other neighborhoods were opening, Union Market, like every money was being invested. The breadth and depth of the city was changing drastically because now there's way more people who can live here, right? Because there's way more residences, which now means we have lots more real estate that we didn't have in the past. So, but it seems like they invest all this money in an area and then they're like, okay, we built it, we're done. And I'm sort of like,
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more.
Why would they? I always use Union Station as my messaging. When I first moved here in the 90s, they had just redone Union Station. It was fabulous. They invested all this money. It was shiny and pretty. Every event was there, the whole thing. And then 10 years later,
Nycci, sometimes I think the city thinks that there's more people that live in Washington, D.C. than actually do.
Okay. But
I really believe that.
They have to maintain things. 14th Street should be maintained. It has to be nurtured. You can't just plant the seeds and water it and then don't come back to it.
Well, especially if you stop watering it,
it's going to die.
And so I'm not here to lambaste 14th Street because there are success stories for sure, but the reality is that there's a lot of people closing where we are, and it is not being maintained, and that part is very, very difficult to watch, especially when you've invested millions of dollars in a location that you don't own. You're in somebody else's building and you put up millions of dollars. Your expectation is that your municipality, your city, wherever you live in this country, it doesn't matter. Your expectation is that you've been sold a certain bill of goods, and that the city will, not just the city, but your neighbor, everybody will keep it going and keep it exciting. And so it feels like a little bit in DC, and I won't say that this is, across the board, but there's a little tiny taste that people say, okay, well, I went there a bunch of times. Now I'm going to go to what's new and what's next. And I think that's not just cities. I think that's also life in general, with everything being this sort of a lot of instant gratification, scrolling through Instagram, scrolling through X, all these things. It's speed, speed, speed. Me personally, when I find a restaurant or a business that I love, somebody that cuts my hair, whatever, I keep going back to the same places. I like the notion of being a regular someplace. I like the tradition. I love new restaurants too and new experiences. Don't get me wrong. That's how we learn. But there's something about going back to that old place that you just love that I enjoy that. And so we'll keep building restaurants, but it is, I don't want to pretend like it's not difficult. It is. Everything's more expensive. And yet there is a ceiling as to how much money you can charge for food. And we don't want to be deemed, overtly expensive. We want to feel like we're a great value for people that work with us. We hope that we bring value to their lives as well. But it does become more and more difficult. That doesn't mean we're going to stop. That's what the restaurant business industry is. I mean, when you think about COVID and how the restaurant industry reacted, I mean, who's the first ones that are always asked to come to somebody's aid? If there's, look at, I mean, you want to talk about the ultimate, look at Jose Andreas's work that he does.
I know.
But on a smaller level, every restaurant is a mini World Central Kitchen. We're always doing charity events. We're always bringing, and when COVID hit, if there was ever an industry that was going to be creative and figure a way out of it, now granted, government helped us dramatically there. We can't, we can't argue that without government support, a lot more restaurants would have gone out of business.
Oh, without a doubt.
We're very, very grateful for that. And so, while there's landlords that might charge a lot of money or not wanted to work with us the way that other landlords wanted to work with us, overall it comes out in the wash, and we love what we do. I mean, I don't want to speak for Alex. I think he feels this way. We're grateful that we found careers where we don't feel like we go to work. It's our passion. And
for me, it was a career change. I was doing the 9-to-5 kind of job, working, in investments and in consulting, and I didn't love it. I loved parts of it. I loved being able to take a 2-week vacation in August, but all the wrong things, And the second that I applied to go to culinary school to the Culinary Institute of America, I knew I made the right decision to do that. Not so much because of the school, but because of the opportunities to then work with Noah Carroll at Café Beloud and Johnny Uzzini and Jean-Georges, and ultimately to be able to go and move to Washington, D.C. and work at Osteria Marini as a pastry chef in just a couple of years. So it was because of those things that, that every one of those decisions to me felt like the right decision. I never felt like I was going backwards, but always forwards. And the learning for me in those experiences also taught me that learning never, ever ends. Like we're always continuing to improve ourselves, improve our knowledge, improve how we run our restaurants, making our restaurants as profitable as they can be under the circumstances that they're in. And that's really what. Yeah,
well, if I can jump in on that, I think, Alex, what you say is so important there. And I've certainly said this on this show before. There are some restaurateurs who were very successful and, we're kind of angry that they're not still successful, but they did. I'm not talking about the pandemic. I'm just talking about they had their concept, they were killing it. And then, now they're not. And they're like, they're kind of bitchy about it. And I'm like, maybe you didn't evolve. Like, I know, I can't tell you, like in my consulting business, like I'd be like, it's time to move this dish off the menu. And somebody will say, no, it's a favorite. If I take it off, they'll go crazy. And I was like, or they'll try something new, like, or they can special order it. Or, you know what I mean? Like, maybe it is time to retire it and bring it back as a special. You know what I mean? Like, you have to stay fresh in this industry. No different 100%. Than the movie industry, the fashion industry, even being a doctor. If you don't stay up to date with the newest techniques, you're not providing what's best for your patients. So I
couldn't agree more. Yeah,
all
I couldn't
over,
agree more. It's so true. And I mean, it's one of the reasons we travel, as the company. When I think about what do I want us to do, I want us to always be evolving, putting the very best that we know how to do on the table. But it's not just about the food. It's about the experience. But what we will agree on, again, when I go back to your statement about things changing, I would say that maybe even pre-pandemic, we were starting to talk like this. And in conversations, pre-pandemic, the word culture was used in every single meeting that we attended, whether we were using it or somebody in our group was using it. But the word culture. During the pandemic, it was impossible to create culture when people were at home and not, interacting the way we interact today. But one of the things that we thought about was how can we continue to evolve? How can we continue to not only learn, but most importantly for both the staff, the team members on the staff, and also for our guests, is how can we provide a better experience? And that word experience is now sort of, at least in our industry, is sitting side by side with the word culture.
Agreed.
And when people come in, they just want to have a great time. They're sick of sitting home. And the other thing I would say is this, Nycci, and is I never use as an example when I talk about an experience. That experience for me needs to be in person as much as possible. Even though this is great and it feels like I'm talking to you, but I know you well and I know Alex obviously well, so it feels good. But it's not the same as if we were sitting in a room sharing a plate of pasta together or a glass of wine together. And so I think about the success and how I never pre-COVID ever used delivery services. Never did it. If I was hungry, I cooked, or if I was hungry, I went out. Those were my two choices.
Right.
And maybe I'd get Chinese food delivered when I was with my mom, or something like that. But now I'm like scrolling, I'm like, oh, what about this place? I want to try that place. And I'll get something. And I'm sitting there in my sweatpants, eating Thai food, thinking, this is really delicious. There's no experience attached to it.
I mean, listen, I have to end the show because we only have an hour, but I will echo that. I did not grow up in a household where we ordered in, and except for like pizza, on Saturday nights when my parents went into the city, and we were just alone in the house. But actually, that is when I started cooking, much like you. I mean, I started cooking and playing restaurant with, my best friend when we were like 8, and we would serve our siblings like whatever we wanted to cook. Nobody got sick though, but we did do that. And so I feel very kindred with you on that. I mean, I didn't wind up in the kitchen. I wound up here. But there's so much going on in this industry. There's so many layers. And I always think about the people who are the diners, right? Like, especially the rabid diners, like the ones who just love the industry so much. But I think of my parents. My parents are rabid diners, right? Like they eat everywhere and they tell you about every menu and every chef and everything. But they have no idea how the business works. None. And it always fascinates me that they really they don't know what they don't know. And I guess they're not supposed to know, but I think a little education helps when you go. You should be an educated consumer no matter where you go.
But a little mystery is fun too. Like, how do they get that to come out and look so good? How come my food doesn't look like when I'm at home? So that's part of the fun too.
Just being in the room and the experience of being in that special space. Like you're sitting in Namako and you're in the room with the right music and, listening to the conversations that you're having with your friends and enjoying delicious food.
Yep. And it is delicious. We had a great meal last night. Derek is killing it.
I'm glad you enjoyed. I'm sorry that I missed you by a day.
That's okay.
I'll be there tonight. I'll be there later.
Okay. It was great. That the silken tofu in the miso soup is it's insane. It's so good. He really is killing it. So anyway, all right. Please tell everybody where they can find you both. Alex, where can we find you on Insta?
So you can find me on Instagram. Chef Alex Levin is my Instagram handle. For our restaurants as well, you can find us at Namako DC, at Altistrada_DC, at Altistrada BA, at Altistrada Fox, and at Altistrada Wellesley.
Okay.
And Michael, I know I'm missing a couple of things, but maybe you can.
Michael, where can we find you?
So I'm at my name on everything. I'm at Michael Schlau, Instagram, Facebook, whatever you want to find me on. And you find me in the restaurants, most importantly. That's where I like to hang out and be. And it's what got me in it in the first place and what keeps me coming back every day. Great.
Well, I love it. I love this candid conversation. As I said in the beginning of the show, I mean, we could always go down a rabbit hole together, right? Because there's so many layers.
We need to get to Italy. We got so much to talk about with Italy.
I know. You and I will talk about that offline.
All right.
Okay. So I want to thank you all for joining me today on this episode of Industry Night. For those of you who don't know, you can find me on all your podcast platforms. Follow me at NYCCI, NELLIS on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Watch the show, please, on YouTube. Comment, add questions, subscribe, do all the things. There is so much going on out there in the world, but especially in the DC area. Check out the list, areyouonit.com, for not only everything you heard here, but all the other incredible things happening around the DC metro area. Be safe out there and have a delicious week.
Produced by Heartcast Media.